Hi, thanks for joining us online today. I'm Heidi Claire, and I'm on staff here at Canyons, and we are so happy to have you. If this is your first time with us today, thanks for joining in. It's always a fun experience, and we love having you. Just a couple of things I want you to know. If you are joining us online, and you have been, online services are not going away. We know it's been a crazy week, and we're opening our building this week, and we can't wait to see everybody, but that doesn't change for you. If you're still not comfortable and ready to be in large spaces, we understand that, and meeting in public can be a scary thing right now. We want to honor where you're at. So feel free to stay home and continue watching online. Thank you so much to everybody who showed up again and just made those hanging baskets. We've had a great response from our local businesses, and they have loved putting them in their windows and outside their doors. Also, we're in the fourth week of Out of the Shallows with our lead pastor, and he will be wrapping up our series today. So thank you so much for joining, and we hope you have a great Sunday.
Well, hi, this is Andrew Powell from Canyons Church, and I am so glad that you are here with us today. We are concluding our Out of the Shallows series. If you missed any of the previous parts, you can watch them online. You can go to Facebook or to our website. You can find us on there. But really, this is a series for anyone. Anyone that has dealt with spirituality and faith as a whole at any level and any stage, because nobody, regardless of where you're at, regardless of what you believe right now, regardless of the position that you're in right now, nobody wants the spirituality in their life, that aspect of their life, to be defined as shallow. We want depth in that category in life. Every single one of us wants there to be genuine, authentic depth in that category of our life and who we are as a person. So this is why this conversation is really important. Let me give you a brief overview of what we've talked about the last several weeks. First of all, we started off with the understanding of who's really responsible for your own growth. And we said that absolutely at the very beginning, just like physically, at the very beginning, you have to be fed. Someone needs to feed you, walk along with you, and feed you. But just like physically, it would be awkward if you continue to be bottle fed with milk your whole entire life. You shouldn't be a senior in high school asking someone to bottle feed you. That's awkward. It's uncomfortable. Nobody likes that image. Nobody likes that picture, right? That's awkward. Same thing in our spiritual life as well. That we need to at some point pick up the fork, and we need to move forward in our lives to start feeding ourselves, to start consuming on our own and eating those things, consuming those things that are good, beneficial, and helpful for us. Week 2, we actually introduced this idea that as much as it's good and important that we need to have calories coming in, that's only half of the conversation, only half of the equation, that we also need to have calories going out. Even if they're good calories coming in, we need to be doing something with those calories. Otherwise, we're just sitting on the couch eating. That's all we're doing. So as God works in you, right? As God works in you and adjusts you and changes you and develops you and grows you, you need to actually have outward energy, moving and doing something with what God is leading you to do. So work out what God is working in. And so that's what we talked about week 2. Week 3, we actually shifted. We kind of pivoted from that conversation. And we looked at something that often it looks and it sounds and it feels like it's a peripheral, like kind of outside edge of what it means to be part of a church and ultimately a Jesus follower. But the reality is that's not a peripheral, that's not an outside, it's a central thing, that we need to have community so that we is greater than me. That when it's up to just me, when I'm isolated, It is difficult. It is a challenge to improve on my own. But when I have people around me that are encouraging me, that are holding me accountable, that are reminding me who I am and who God says I am, when I have those people in my life, I'm able to grow. And I'm able to go from the shallows to the depths of life. Better, quicker, faster, more efficiently, more effectively. So again, that's not an outside thing, that's a center thing. So that's where we've been in this series so far. Today I'm going to talk to you about something that is, honestly, this is probably one of the biggest challenges, one of the biggest obstacles, one of the biggest things that is in opposition of our growth, to go from the shallows to the depths. But before I get there and divulge all of the information at the end, let me tell you a little bit about my history, my story, just to kind of paint the picture. When I was growing up, I grew up in a very strong Christian home, and it was, I mean, life going to church was awesome. I went to church all the time. My family helped at our church that we were a part of, and it was incredible. Church was easy. Faith was easy. When I was in grade school, it was just so much part of my life that I had really no fear to talk to anybody about Jesus. I remember, I remember a moment where I was on a field trip in Bush Park in Salem, Oregon, and I don't even know why we were there, but I saw I saw someone that was running. They were exercising, like they were in exercise mode. They were working out. They were running, and I decided that it was the right time to talk to them about Jesus. So I ran up alongside them, this little fourth grader, and I started to ask the questions like, do you know who Jesus is? Is he your savior? Like, I'm asking these questions while someone's working out, just because it was just normal in my life. In my, my classmates, I don't know if I was just like, if I was just accepted enough, or had the popularity enough that it was just kind of forgotten about. It wasn't forgotten about with my teacher. I got in trouble for that one. I do know that. I do know I got in trouble. But that was just normal for me. When I was growing up, that was normal. I find out later on that's not normal for most people. And I found out also when I got to junior high and high school that normalcy left, because faith got difficult. It got hard. It got challenging in that moment. Right? You recognize that you're not you're not in a small pond anymore. You're in a much larger pond. And as life grows, that pond gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And as it gets bigger, we realize that faith isn't just fun and games. Following Jesus isn't just fun and games. It's not about saying a prayer one time and saying, okay, I'm a Christian, we're good to go. That following Jesus, taking action steps after Jesus, that is a challenge. That is difficult. That is hard. And in fact, I found out these things, that first of all, it's unpopular. To follow Jesus when I was in junior high, when I was in high school, that's not what the majority of people were doing. And it forced me to make a decision. Am I going to do the popular thing, or am I going to do what's unpopular? Am I going to prioritize how I spend my time and the people that I spend my time with in a certain way that's not really what the popular kids are doing? So I get that. I understand that. I understand that my dating pool was pretty small. It's pretty small. I didn't date in high school. It's real small. It's not only unpopular, it's also difficult. Right? When we start to follow Jesus, we realize pretty quickly, if anyone's followed Jesus for more than like 5 minutes, we realize that it's difficult. Right? We hear the words, we say the words that we need to love our neighbor, and that sounds great. Right? We say it all the time. Oh, we need to love our neighbor. That sounds great. Right up until that moment that that our neighbor comes face to face with us, and there's a moment of anger. You're like, this love feels a lot like anger right now. It's difficult. It is challenging. It is not easy to walk out what we've been talking, right? That is difficult. That's challenging. Now, the other thing that this is, it is absolutely risky. When we follow Jesus, it's risky. And we see this over and over in life. It is risky. And here's why. We like to have our life planned out. If you're anything like me, you have like this month planned out. You have a year from now planned out. You have 5 years, 10 years. Like, you've got your goals and your markers along the way. You're like, okay, I got this. We're going this direction. It's going to take us about this long, and we're going to get there. Right? That's what we love to do. Financially, we love to plan. With our career, we love to plan and dream and see where it's going to go. But it's not always that way when we're following Jesus, because we have our plans, and then we recognize that when we're following Jesus, our plans have to be submitted to his plans. to God's plans for us. And the part of the challenge in this, we don't often know God's plans until the moment of. And in the moment, when we're just about to take a step in the direction towards our plans, we realize that we have to drop what we were doing and make an adjustment. And it might take us longer to get what we wanted to get or where we wanted to get to or how we wanted to get there or what we were driving to get there or whatever it might be. Right? It's difficult when we have to adjust our plans to his plans. It is risky even because we recognize we have to take our hands off the controls for a while. I'm going to trust God more than I'm going to trust myself. That's risky. It feels risky. Now, the last component that we learn when we start to follow Jesus is that it's inconvenient. Time in and time out. It is inconvenient. Right? It's not easy. It's difficult. It's risky. It's inconvenient for us. I mean, right in the moment where we want to sit down, the moments where we wanted to sleep in on a Sunday morning, the moments where we don't actually want to talk to that person, that stranger, about their life problems, that we know like it might go in the direction of someone taking a step of faith, but we're like, man, this is just inconvenient. I've got somewhere to be right now. Like I got stuff to do. It's inconvenient. Following Jesus is absolutely inconvenient. Now, when you hit one of these things in your life, right, we're following Jesus, everything's great, and then all of a sudden it's unpopular. All of a sudden we find out that it's actually difficult or it's risky or it's inconvenient, whatever speed bump you run into, and maybe it feels less like a speed bump and more like an impact, but when you run into one of those things, we probably stop and pause and ask this question. Maybe we don't verbalize it, but we feel the question, is it worth it? Is it worth it to follow Jesus? I think this is a great question for all of us to ask. We should all be asking this question because there is a cost attached to following Jesus. There's something that is attached to it. It's not just fun and games. It's not just easy. It's not just comfortable, right? Staying in the shallows, that's comfortable. That's easy. Moving to the depths, moving into the deep, that's where it's challenging. And that's where we ask the question, is it worth it? And maybe you've gotten to the point where you've checked out from the perimeter, like you've been watching, from the outside looking in, you're like, man, it looks good, it sounds good, but when it gets down to it, I understand that there's a cost attached to it, and I just want to know, is it worth it? Before I take that last step of faith, is it worth it? Or maybe you've been following Jesus for a while, but that season hit you, or that circumstance hit you, and you had to take a step back, and you're like, I got to push pause on this for a while. And now you recognize, you're like, man, it's real easy over here. It's real comfortable over here in the shallows. Here's what I can tell you. Comfort is the enemy of the depths. Comfort is absolutely the enemy of where God wants to take you in your life, the plans that God has for you, the walking out the potential that he's placed in you. That doesn't come from the shallows. That doesn't come from when it's easy. That doesn't come from when it's comfortable. That comes when you take a step of faith. That comes when you step out and you're not sure where your feet are going to hit. Where you step out and you're not even sure how deep the water is. When you have to trust that there's a God that has gone there before you, that has called you to this moment, that is with you in this moment. That's where you grow. That's where you experience something more. And that's where we have to understand this question, is it worth it? If we don't have a compelling answer to that, we won't move forward. We won't do it. Because if it's not worth it, we're not going to do it. If we don't have a compelling answer for that, we will eventually step back. Maybe we'll never leave the shallows. And here's something else that I believe, and what I've seen and what I've experienced, that if someone doesn't leave the shallows over time, they eventually will move even back from the shallows altogether. Right? They won't just play around with faith because they'll recognize this isn't going anywhere. This isn't doing anything. And oftentimes they step back from faith altogether because they didn't progress forward. We talked about this throughout this whole entire series, right? That a growing relationship with Jesus, it's moving in a direction. It's moving forward. And just like any relationship, it's either growing or it's diminishing. It's always in motion. It's always moving. One of these aspects, when we're riding the fence, we're not sure if it's worth it or not. We look at it, we're like, man, that's going to cost me that. Do I have to behave? Do I have to live my life that way? How does this, how does this require me to respond to my spouse or my kids or my boss or my employer or, whoever it might be in my life? Or how would I have to change my financial habits? Oh my goodness, I don't want to do that because I've got a plan, right? I've got the plan. All of these things, when we're debating this, right? It's kind of like we're playing around with faith as if we're at a buffet at a lunch, right? And it's wonderful. It's fantastic. I love buffet style food where you walk into the room and you start to strategize. At least I do. I'm like, okay, I only have so much stomach space. So what is good enough to fill up and to fill up like seconds and thirds? I would eat multiple meals at one sitting. It was like, I'm gonna stay here and get my money's worth. And we walk into the buffet. We're like, okay, that table, that's good. I'll go hit that. I'll pick one of those. I'll get 3 of those. Yet nothing from that table, right? And you go back and you sit down, you take a bite, and you're like, oh, that was okay, but it's not good enough to take stomach space at this moment because I only have so much stomach space. We do this with our faith. I'm gonna pick that right there. I'm gonna pick that aspect right. I'm gonna leave that. No, I'm not gonna go down that road. That aspect is not gonna be part of my faith journey. We pick and choose what we're gonna be a part of. And when we do that, and I'm just gonna say this honestly, for a large majority of people that call themselves Christians, this is the exact tension that they experience. Which also means that for a large majority of people, when our words are saying one thing, that we're going to follow Jesus, but our actions are that we're selectively following Jesus, that we're just picking and choosing where we're going to follow Jesus, when that happens, it looks an awful lot like hypocrisy, especially from the outside looking in. And maybe that's some of your story. In fact, you've walked around the shallows for a while and you're like, you know what, I would consider taking a step, but I've seen too many people that claim to be following Jesus, but they're really not doing a whole lot other than what I'm doing right now. Like, it's not that much different. That might be the last hurdle for you that you haven't been able to get over yet at this point. So we got these tensions. We got these moments in life where we evaluate, is this worth it in my life? And I love this example that we read in the book of Matthew. Matthew was one of Jesus' disciples, and he was able to watch firsthand exactly what Jesus did, and he was able to listen and have conversations with Jesus. He was there when Jesus would talk to the disciples because he was a disciple. And then he recorded all these things down, right? And they've survived antiquity, and we're able to read those words, what he wrote today. So Matthew actually provides this picture, this moment, this specific moment that we're going to look at. It's pretty interesting because Jesus kind of sits down with the disciples. They're getting a pretty good following at this point. His ministry's taken off. And he asks the disciples, who do all those people, who do they say that I am? They have some answers for him. And then he says, okay, that's the outside looking in, but you guys that follow me around, you guys that spend the most time with me, who do you say that I am? And Peter, in this moment, he stands up like we are accustomed Peter to doing. And he says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Right? There's this massive, huge moment, like the world stops for a second. And Jesus looks at Peter and he essentially says, that truth, what you just said, is what I will build my church on. That is the foundation for everything moving forward from this point, right? Right. Peter, at this point, he's like cloud 9. He just aced the test. It's like that moment where you go to school and you studied and you were prepared. You went through the test and you got everything right. And you knew before it was ever graded, it was like, I nailed that. I got 100%. Every single question, I knew it. He is on cloud 9, right? So this whole thing happens. Big, massive moment. And then Matthew records, he actually denotes that there's a shift immediately following. In this same moment, there's a shift in Jesus and the direction of his conversations with the disciples moving forward. Like this shifts. And Matthew picks up, and we're going to look at chapter 16, verse 21. From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things. Right? And this would be contradictory to what the disciples thought would happen. Right? This isn't the direction we were going. That he would suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and on the third day be raised to life. And this would have been so confusing for the disciples, right? This would have been so confusing. Like, hold on, we have so much momentum. There are so many people jumping on board, getting behind this movement that you're starting. This doesn't even make sense. This must be figurative, not literal. This must be figurative, what you're saying. And they're probably talking to each other like, how does this work out? What does this actually mean? And Jesus told them essentially at this point, he's like, hey, guys, just listen up. Everything that you've experienced so far, it's all going to change. Like, we've been on tour, like the band together, we've been on tour for a while. Tour's coming to an end. And at the end of the tour, it's over. Like, the band's going to break up. It's going to be different than anything that we've experienced so far. Everything that you've gotten comfortable with is about to change. So remember, Peter, cloud 9, in this moment. We look at what happens in verse 22. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. Now, hold on. Peter just makes this claim that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, right? That's what he says. And he decides that he's going to rebuke that guy that he just claimed who he is. Okay, good. I don't know if I would go that far, Peter, but he does. He says, never, Lord, this shall never happen to you. This shall never happen to you. We're not going to let it happen. Jesus, you just bring your God powers, whatever that is. You just bring what you have available, and me and the boys, we'll do what we can do. Like, I don't know, someone's probably got a sword laying around somewhere. Like, we'll try to do. This will not happen to you. This won't happen to you. This is what Jesus responds with. This is what Jesus responds with. He says, turning to Peter, verse 23, Jesus turned and said to Peter, get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. Ouch. Right. Peter, who's just been on cloud 9, is now like just destroyed in a crumple on the ground. Like, the amount of emotion and the emotional swing that just happened in his world, he's probably just crying the rest of the day, like out of exuberance, like I did something really good, and then Jesus told me that he called me Satan, and he told me to get behind him, and that I don't have God's things in mind, that I only have like my thing. Oh my goodness. Like, this would be so devastating for most people. But essentially what Jesus says, essentially the kind of the bottom line of what he's trying to say is, you're getting in the way. You're getting in the way. You know, Jesus would say, I have an agenda. I'm trying to do something, and you are standing in the way of it. If we're to put ourselves in that shoe, I believe that there's a lot more of us that are in Peter's shoes than we realize. But if we were to step into that moment, you know, imagine this. Jesus, the Son of God, his plan for redemption for the world for all time. Like, this is like the big plan. This is God's plan for the world for redemption that Jesus is going to act out. And Peter stands up and says, no, we're not going to let that happen. We're not going to let that happen, because that sounds like pain. That sounds like it's difficult. That sounds like it's unpopular, like it's risky, like it's inconvenient. No. That doesn't sound like the brand that we've been a part of lately. That doesn't sound like what we've been talking about. This is not that. We're not going to let that happen to you. And in our life, when God starts to give us just a glimpse of the next step or the next plan that he has, how he's going to utilize the strengths and the potential that he's placed in you, oftentimes we stand up just like Peter and we say, no, we're not going to let that happen. No, that sounds too difficult. That sounds like there's a cost attached. And when I said the prayer, when I said, I invited you into my heart, Jesus, and I said the prayer with my parents or my small group leader, whoever, they never told me that there's a cost attached. This sounds like there's a cost attached, and I don't think that's right. I'm not going to do that. That sounds too difficult and challenging for me. You been there? Have you been to that spot before in your life where you have this tension? You have the moment of everything's right? We just aced the quiz. We got all the answers right, and then we recognize the cost that's attached to it, what that actually means, the direction that this is going. That's challenging. That's difficult. Is it worth it? Is it worth it? Now, luckily for us, Jesus actually gives words to that question. Is it worth it? But first, he actually addresses the cost that's attached. And he tells the disciples this, and he tells you and me this as well. 2,000 years later, if we decide that we want to be a Jesus follower, right? It's not just about the safety net prayer of I hope if I say the right words that I'll get into heaven eventually. No, no, no. If we want to be a Jesus follower, it looks like something. And Jesus addresses this tension, right? First, he says there's a cost attached. And in verse 24, Jesus turns to the disciples. He says, Jesus said to them, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. Well, that doesn't sound like fun at all. In fact, for the disciples, for us, it's a little bit more clear because 2,000 years later, looking in the rearview mirror a while ago, we know that Jesus actually literally carried his cross that he was crucified on up to the hill, right? He did that. So that's a very vivid picture. The disciples didn't know that that was going to happen yet. They didn't know that that's how it was going to happen. But it was still a very vivid picture for them. It was an illustration for them. And Jesus was saying, hold on, you guys are familiar with crucifixions. Wink, wink, like this is going to, you guys are familiar with this? If you're going to follow me, you're going to at some point have to deny yourself and you're going to have to take up your own cross. You're going to have to do those things. If you want to follow me, that's where this is headed. And at that moment, a lot of us say, okay, well, thanks for your time. That sounds not fun. Peace out. We'll see you later. Like we take off. At that point, it's like, that's too difficult. That's too much. That is too much what you're asking. Why would I want to do that? Why would I want to do that with my life? If it's going to only cost me, if it's going to be a burden, if it's going to be something that I have to carry, if it's going to be a moment where I have to deny myself, right? Choose something else over me. And it's so much easier, so much more comfortable to choose me in my life. Why would I follow you? And this is what Jesus says. He actually has an answer to that. This is the compelling answer that Jesus has for why we should follow him. In the next verse, verse 25. For whoever wants to save their life, right? If I'm going to try to control everything, I'm going to try to save my life. I'm going to try to save that moment. I'm going to try to save up for that thing that I want. I want to live my life the way that I want to because I think that I know what's best for me in my life. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it. That you will actually lose your life by trying to save it. But whoever loses their life for me will find it. Like that hurts my brain to think about. Hold on. What are you actually saying there? What does that actually mean even? If I give my life to you, that I'll actually gain life? Yeah, that's exactly right. Let me give you an illustration. So, Amy and I, we have two golden doodles that we love very, very much, very dearly, Jovi and Watson. Watson is a little bit bigger, by a little bit, like almost twice as big. He's around 100 pounds, big boy. He's a big boy. But he loves to play fetch. He loves to chase one of these around. Oop. Oh my goodness. One of these. Really good coordination there. All right. He loves to chase a tennis ball. That's what he loves to do as much as possible. He will chase a tennis ball all day long. And they get gross and they get dirty and they get smelly. And he loves every second of it. He begs for it. He never wants me to put the tennis ball away, right? Even when Amy and I go out and we buy him different toys, we're like, hey, we spent $20 on this, buddy. We tell him how much it costs. Like, look how clean it is. Look how nice it is. He might sniff it around a little bit, play with it a little bit. But the moment that the tennis ball comes out, he drops that brand new, perfectly great toy that's so much better, so much. I mean, this literally is just a ball. It's a ball. And this is what he goes to. This is what he goes after. This is what he won't let go of. And this is the picture that God has for you and for me. Because we so often, we want this ball. It's comfortable. We know exactly what it does. It's got our smell on it. Like we've been there long enough. We've stayed in the shallows with this ball long enough that we love this ball. And God is saying, wait, I have so much more for you. I have this bigger, better, more enjoyable toy for you, this life for you. It's greater than what you're experiencing right now. But in order to experience it, you've got to lay this down. You've got to empty your hand and actually give it to me so your hands are empty for you to receive what I have for you. But it's going to cost you something. It's going to cost you something. You have to lay this down. And if you're like Watson, you're not going to lay the ball down. You're going to keep going back to it. You might dabble with the other toy for a little while, with the other life for a little while, but eventually you're back. You're back on the tennis ball. The dirty, grimy, gross, smelly tennis ball. So, is it worth it? Is it worth it? It's a good question. It's a question that we should all wrestle with. And I know, I get it. Life is busy. We have seasons that come and go. We have moments in life that we want to jump in, and other moments where it's like, oh, man, I got so much on my plate. But is it worth it? Here's what I can tell you from my experience. Unequivocally, absolutely, it is worth it. It is worth it. The only regrets that I have is that I've messed around with the tennis ball too much. I've gone back to the tennis ball too much. Why? Because the most enjoyable, the most meaningful moments of my life were not with the tennis ball in the shallows. They were in the deeps, in the depths. They were in the moments where I was able, God actually provided me the opportunity to help someone take a step towards Him, a life-changing moment. And if you've experienced that, there's nothing like it. There's nothing like helping someone step across the line of faith, helping someone take the next step of faith. There's nothing like it. There's nothing more rewarding than that. Is it worth it? Absolutely. Is it unpopular at times? 100%. I mean, that sometimes I just feel like that's just part of my life, who I am, but I can blame a little bit of that. I'm following Jesus like, well, maybe I'm just not popular, whatever. Is it unpopular at times? Yes. Sometimes it is. Is it difficult in times? Yes. Is it risky? Absolutely. Is it inconvenient? Absolutely. Is it worth it? Yeah. Yeah, because I've experienced moments where I've dealt with loss of loved ones. And in those moments, you know what held me together? Wasn't myself. What held me together was that there was a God that was in the moment with me. Because my foundation was not shallow, it was deep. And when your foundation is deep, when you have that deep-rooted faith, those things aren't going to sway you. They're not going to drag you along. They're not going to crush you. They're going to be painful. It's going to be difficult, but you will be able to withstand it and even somehow grow from it. What about when Amy and I adopted Luke? That was difficult. That was challenging. You know why we walked through that? Well, you know how I was able to walk through that? It wasn't because I had shallow faith. It was because in that moment, I had deep faith that God had a plan, even when I didn't know the next step. Even when I thought that this gift could be ripped from my hands as I was holding him. We could have lost him. All of those fears that parents feel. We felt that. But we had our faith that was deep and deeply rooted. And when that happens, when you experience that in life, it's absolutely worth it. It's absolutely worth it to know that even when I don't see my plans happening and taking place, if I trust God, if I believe in His plans more than mine, and I submit my plans to Him, He will do what He says He will do. He will come through. That His life that He has for us is abundantly more than what we've ever planned for. It is bigger and greater than. Life and life more abundantly. That's what He offers you. You want the tennis ball? Is that where you're at? Is that I just want to be comfortable right now? Maybe that's where you're at. And that's okay. Just keep the door open. Just keep the conversation going. But for some of you, maybe you're not a Christian. Maybe you've never taken that step of faith. You've never crossed the line of faith. For some of you right now, you've wrestled with this long enough. You're like, you know what? I need to make a decision. I need to put down the ball. I need to step out of the shallows and step into a real deep faith. And it's going to be worth it. And I don't know how it's going to be worth it. And I know there's a cost attached to it. But I think that in the end, and I don't mean in the end in a couple decades or however long we have left on this earth, but I mean in the end as far as eternity goes, it will be worth it every single day that I choose to put down the tennis ball and to pick up the life that God has for me now. It will be worth it. Maybe today is your day. And I'm going to ask you to take a step here in just a second. Maybe you are a Jesus follower. Maybe you've been a Christian for a while, but you recognize that you started to ride that fence between shallow and deep for a while. You took a step back. You took a season off. Something happened in your life that knocked you off course, and you haven't been able to recover from it. Maybe you just got exhausted. You're like, you know what? This is too much right now. You took a step back, but it's now is the time to get back in. You feel this tension. You need to put down the tennis ball because you've experienced that more, that greater, that deeper life that's available to you. And it's time to put that down and grab a hold of the life that God is offering us. And if that's you, I'm going to ask you to take a step with me as well. For both of you, I'm going to pray in just a moment. And I'm going to ask that you, regardless of where you're at, if you're ready to take that step, that you would pray with me. That you would just pray this in your head, out loud if you want to, in your heart. That you would say these words, that you would mean these words. If you would just pray with me. So let's do that at this point. Jesus, I'm in. I'm deciding that I want to be in the deeps. I want to move from the shallow to the depths of what you have for me. I know that it's going to cost me something. I know that there's something attached to it. I also know what you offer is greater than anything I've ever experienced before. And I want that. I want that for myself, and I want that for my future. So Jesus, whatever I need to do, I'm going to take a step. I'm going to start to follow you, not just say a prayer. I'm going to adjust my life. I'm going to submit my life to you. My choices to yours. My plans for yours. And I will take steps in your direction and trust that you will be there for me. In your name I pray. Amen.
Of the Lord Most High, there is courage in the shadow of His wings. There is peace unending over all my life. There is freedom that washes over me, and I find all I need here in your presence, Lord. I open up my soul, and you fill me up with all I need here in your presence, Lord, where blessings overflow. There's always abundantly more. There's rest, there's kindness. There is rest in the goodness of the Lord my God. There is treasure in the kindness of my King. And there is comfort in knowing your unfailing love, my provider. You set my spirit free, and I find all I need here in your presence, Lord. I open up my soul, and you fill me up with all I need here in your presence, Lord, where blessings overflow. There's always abundantly more. There's always more than I could find, more than I could ask or see, more than I could fathom. God, your love for me is better than I imagined. More than I can ask or see, more than I His hands, his feet, my Savior on that cursed tree. His body bowed and drenched in tears, they laid him down in Joseph's tomb, the entrance sealed by heavy snow. Messiah still and all alone. So we praise him together. Oh, praise the name of the Lord our God. Oh, praise his name forevermore. For endless days we will sing your praise. Oh Lord our God. Then on the third, at break of dawn, the Son of Heaven rose again. Oh, trample death, where is your sting? The angels roar for Christ the King. Oh, praise the name of the Lord our God. Oh, praise his name forevermore. For endless days we will sing your praise. Oh Lord our God. He shall return in robes of white. The blazing sun shall pierce the night, and I will rise among the saints, my gaze transfixed on Jesus' face. So that's what we want to do right now, wherever you are. If you're at home, gathered with some family, or by yourself, wherever you are, what we want to do is completely fix our eyes on Jesus, because he's our hope in every situation. We're not waiting on an experience to bolster our faith. Rather, we're praying and asking for the faith that allows us to see our situation through the truth that Jesus is completely in control, and he's always been good to us. He always has been, he is now, and he always will be. And the proper response to a God like that is not fear or timidity, it's to look at him and say thank you, and to trust him and to praise him in the middle of things we don't understand, the outcomes that we're not sure of, knowing that he is working all things together for good. And that's the reason why we sing, to encourage each other and to remember who he is. So together, wherever you are, continue to praise his name, believing he's good. Sing it with me. Oh, praise the name of the Lord our God. Oh, praise his name forevermore. For endless days we will sing your praise. Oh Lord our God. Yes, we praise you. Oh, praise the name of the Lord our God.
the king of my heart be the shadow where I hide, the ransom for my life. Oh, he is my song. 'Cause you are good, you're good. Oh, you are good, you're good. Oh, you are good, so good. Oh, you are good, you're good. Oh, and let the king of my heart be the wind inside my sails, the anchor in the waves. Oh, he is my song. And let the king of my heart be the fire inside my veins, the echo of my days. Oh, he is my song. And let the king of my heart be the wind inside my sails, the anchor in the waves. Oh, he is my song. And let the king of my heart be the fire inside my veins, the echo of my days. Oh, he is my song. 'Cause you are good, you're good, yeah. Whoa, you are good, you're good. Whoa, you are good, yeah. You're good, yeah. Whoa, you are good, you're good. Whoa, you're never gonna let me down. You're never gonna let me down. You're never gonna let me down. I believe it. You're never gonna let me down. 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 This we know. You're never gonna let me down. 'Cause you are good, you're good. Whoa, you are good, you're good. Oh, you are good, yeah, you're so good, yeah. Whoa, you are good, you're good. Whoa, and you're never gonna let me down. You're never gonna let me down. You're never gonna let me down. You're never gonna let me down.
Father, today we choose to believe that that's true. And in the midst of circumstances that seem out of our control, that cause fear, God, we choose to believe that that is who you are, that you're good, you're still in control, and that you'll never let us down. So God, we fix our eyes on you. We remember that today. We thank you that that's who you are, that we can look to you, that you're our help, that you're our hope. And we cling to that today. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
I hope you've enjoyed this series. I hope that you have progressed through this. I hope that you've been, if you started to read the Stay Fit on you version, that plan. I hope that that's been enjoyable for you and helped you grow and feed yourself well. I also hope I also hope, my prayer has been throughout this entire series, that this silly little tennis ball that we cling to, that we would eventually let go of it and open our hands and open our hearts and open ourselves up for what God has for us. This next week, we're going to have a brand new series that we're launching. It's called Halftime. We're really, really, really excited about it. It's really, talk about halftime. We're about halfway through the year. It feels like it's been 4 years since December, right? It feels like it's been quite a while. There's been a few pivots along the way. But this is an opportunity that we have to decide to be intentional, to move forward, to get back on track, right? To finish the year strong. So we're going to start that series. It's called Halftime. Really excited about it. Thank you for being here with us. We hope to see you soon.